Moon Knight was already crazy weird as a show on Disney Plus, but it just got to a whole other level with episode 4 because we've dealt with some weird stuff in the show already. Of course, dealing with Mark Spector and his dissociative identity disorder, dealing with the Egyptian gods, the whole Moon Knight suiting up thing. There's been some really cool but weird stuff going on here. But like I said, episode 4 just takes it to a whole other level because we get a lot of weird in this episode. A lot of twists and turns, reveals, and especially the huge ending of this episode, which is super confusing, but I absolutely love it. That's what I love about the show, is because it makes you think. And I've got so many questions that I really need answers to. Fortunately, we got to wait till next week's episode with episode 5 for that. But, I feel like it's going to be worth the wait because there's so much going on here. And for now, we can go ahead and talk about episode 4. And before we do that, of course, I do want to give a quick spoiler warning. So if you haven't seen it yet, definitely make sure to go check it out on Disney Plus. And without further ado, let's jump into this and talk about Moon Knight episode 4, aka The Tomb. So the episode begins with the leader of the Egyptian god avatars that we saw at the council trial meeting thing that we had in last week's episode, and he takes Khonshu's statue thing that he's now been imprisoned in and places that up on a wall with a bunch of other imprisoned gods. There's a lot of them there, and kind of makes you think, what did they do and what other gods are up there? Because you look at Khonshu, they never really even gave him a chance. They never even let him plead his case, really. They never even listened to him during that trial, and it's almost like the gods don't care. They kind of mentioned that humans wronged us or something like that, and they're not worth it. So maybe they are on the side of Amit, and given the ending of last week's episode, kind of looks like they're working with Arthur Harrow. So that's definitely a really interesting element right there. But then after this, we catch up with our main characters, of course, Steven and Layla. But Steven, after last week's episode, he won't wake up. So some bad guys show up, Layla hides, she fights them, which is actually a really cool action sequence that we got right here. But anyway, by the end of it, Steven ends up waking up. But Steven won't give up the body, because this is a situation where they really need Mark, because they're going on a whole action adventure here. But Steven won't give up the body, because he's like, oh, you made the promise, as soon as Khonshu's gone, you will leave me alone, and you will go away forever. So he won't give up the body, and Mark actually gets suspicious of, are you in love with Layla? Do you have a crush on my wife? And so, that's true. That's definitely very true here, because she actually almost kisses him when Steven, being the great, humble guy that he is, he moves out of the way before she can kiss him and reveals the truth about how Mark was just protecting her because Khonshu wants her as his next avatar. So, good for you, Steven. That was a very upstanding thing to do right there. And then they say that they're being honesty, but you can kind of see that there's still that spark between the two of them, that romantic tension, that kind of flirtation, and so he kisses her, and seems like she likes it, so that's definitely good news for them right there. I mean, it's really bad for Mark. I actually love how Mark is able to summon enough power there just to make Steven punch himself in the face. That was hilarious. I love that moment. But after this, the two of them, they enter Amit's tomb, where they discover that Amit's last avatar was a pharaoh and actually built this tomb in the shape of the Eye of Horus, which has 6 different passageways, which each represent a different sense that the human body has, and actually a different part of this Eye of Horus diagram or map. So that's pretty cool. There's some really cool Egyptian lore and mythology that's explored specifically in this episode. But then things get a little creepy when they start finding a bunch of fresh blood and bones. So they hide as they hear something coming, and all of a sudden this mummy zombie appears, and it was actually really cool seeing this. Literally, it's a zombie in the MCU. We just saw a werewolf jackal type thing a couple episodes ago. Now we're seeing zombies. The whole supernatural side of the MCU is going to be awesome. I can't wait for Blade with vampires. We actually have Werewolf by Night coming up as well. There's going to be some really cool stuff with the supernatural side of the MCU. But anyway, like I said, we have this mummy zombie here, who has a dead body and starts ripping out this guy's organs and puts them in jars, because that's, of course, a thing with Egyptians, is that when somebody would die, they would remove the organs and put those in little jars and place those inside the sarcophagus with the body, because it was something about, like, it was an easier passageway to the afterlife or something along those lines. But unfortunately, they get spotted, so they run. Layla actually ends up killing one of the zombies, so that was pretty cool. Until Arthur Harrow appears. And he tells her the truth. This truth that he's been alluding to this whole time, that Mark hasn't told her yet. So he tells her for him. And he says that Mark is one of the mercenaries that murdered her father. Now, what's really interesting here is something I just want to point out real quick, is that Arthur Harrow does mention her father's name, and I don't remember exactly what his name was, but I do know that that is a character from the comics who actually is a superhero known as the Scarlet Scarab. And at some point in the comics, he ends up dying, and his daughter becomes the Scarlet Scarab. So I would not at all be surprised, probably not in this season, whether we get a Moon Knight Season 2 or a Moon Knight movie or some point down the line with this character in the MCU, I would not at all be surprised if we see Layla become a superhero as the Scarlet Scarab, especially considering that in this episode, Harrow even mentions that her father called her his little scarab. So I would not at all be surprised if that's the route that they take here, and honestly, I think that would be pretty cool. But meanwhile, Stephen finds the long-lost tomb of Alexander the Great, who was Amit's former avatar. So Stephen finds Amit's statue Abshati thing inside Alexander's mouth, because the whole thing is that, you know, he was the voice of Amit. So he finds that, but then that's when Layla rushes in, and of course the first thing she does is confront Mark about what happened to her father. And so Mark switches over, he takes over power of the body, and he kind of explains himself. He didn't kill her father, but he was there. Apparently his partner got greedy and decided to execute everyone there on the dig site. Now, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not like super accurate on my Moon Knight history, but I believe that his partner was Raul Bushman. Now, Bushman is kind of like pretty much Moon Knight's like arch enemy in the comics. So this is a character that we're most likely not going to be seeing this season, but again is an opportunity for the future, especially to see this character return and see how tied he is to Moon Knight's origins. So he killed everyone there. He even shot Mark, and Mark was supposed to die, but of course he was saved by Khonshu, and that's how he ended up where he is now with the powers of Moon Knight. But then Layla hides again as Arthur Harrow walks in, and he confronts Mark, and he actually shoots him twice, and Mark falls backwards into this pool, and he starts drowning, and he just falls down into the water, into this dark abyss. And I was so confused at this point of the episode, because I was like, alright, you'd think he'd be dead after that. I don't know how you could survive that, but that's the main character of the show. They can't kill off Mark Spector, aka Moon Knight. So I was super confused what was going on here. And then all of a sudden, it switches over to this like old movie, and it's like this Indiana Jones style archaeologist treasure adventure hunter movie. And I was super confused, but then it all makes sense when this archaeologist says his name, and he says that he is Dr. Stephen Grant. So then this is where it pans out to see that this movie is playing in this white room. Everything in this room is white. The walls, the floors, the tables, the outfits everybody's wearing. So much whiteness. And we now know that we are in a mental hospital psych ward type thing here. And so we start seeing some familiar things here. Like, for example, we see Donna, of course, Stephen's boss at the museum. We see a Rubik's Cube. We see both of the people that showed up at Stephen's apartment as police officers, but were revealed to be working for Arthur Harrow. We see a drawing of Khonshu. We see Stephen's fish, Gus. And right there is Mark as a patient in his mental hospital. Layla is his nurse, and then all of a sudden they won bingo, so that's cool and everything. So Mark is sitting there in front of a reflection, so of course he tries to communicate with Stephen, but he's strapped to a wheelchair, and he also has a Moon Knight action figure. Then we see Arthur Harrow is like his therapist or something, and he has the cane. The guy next door has the sandals, and we're seeing all these familiarities, and this was the big twist for the episode to kind of bring into question, did anything actually happen? Anything in the first 3.5 episodes, was any of that real, or was it all inside Mark's head? And is he just absolutely insane? Because I remember that was one of the first things that Kevin Feige said when he announced the show, was that we're going to be following Mark Spector, who has powers from the Egyptian god Khonshu. Either that, or he's just mentally insane. And that's what it brings into question here, of was any of that real, or is he just actually a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? So I love this part, because that's one of the things that's kind of been lacking throughout the show so far, is because obviously they've been adapting the whole dissociative identity disorder thing for this character with the whole switching personalities thing, but I think this adds a great layer to it, where it is not only just like, oh hey, I have multiple personalities, but maybe I don't, and I'm just actually insane. Like, that's such a cool layer to add into things, but then it gets even more complicated when maybe it is real, because then Mark, in his conversation with Arthur Harrow, he gets triggered, so he runs out of there, he escapes, but he runs into a room where he finds this sarcophagus, and all of a sudden the sarcophagus, it starts shaking. You can hear somebody inside it is like yelling and screaming for help, so Mark opens it up, and inside is Stephen Grant. So we have Mark and Stephen side by side here in different bodies, and I don't know what's going on here. Like, is this inside his head right now? Is this going to be in the future kind of like where the personalities live and like where they can communicate with each other more clearly? I don't know, but then they run out of there, and as they're running, they run by another room with another sarcophagus, which is also shaking and thumping around, and that is most likely another personality, because that's exactly what we just saw with Steven. So who is this other personality? Well, we basically got confirmation in last week's episode that there is a third personality other than Mark Spector and other than Stephen Grant. There's a third personality inside this body, as we saw in last week's episode when somebody in the body murdered that thug, and both Mark and Steven were like, we didn't do it. So that, I believe, is Jake Lockley, who in the comics is another personality. He's kind of the streets type guy. He's a taxi driver, and seems like he's actually the most violent of the three, and possibly there's even more. We don't know for sure, but I'm definitely excited to see the reveal of that character and that personality, hopefully in next episode, because I was hoping it'd happen here, but we do have just more teasing of that personality that, again, hopefully will be officially revealed in episode 5. But as if things weren't already weird and crazy enough, as Mark and Steven are running out of there, they open a door, and all of a sudden, standing in front of them is this crazy Egyptian hippo lady who just says, hi, and then that's where the episode ends. And wow, what an ending. So, first of all, let's talk about this hippo lady. So, this, I believe, is the Egyptian goddess Tauret, who is known for having a role in rejuvenation of the dead. So, this would tie into specifically Mark and Steven's story. I'm just going to call him Mark just for now, because Mark just died. You know, he was shot by Harrow, he drowned, and so this is most likely kind of maybe like a purgatory type thing, where I've seen this in a lot of shows recently, specifically last year with DC, in something like Titans and Stargirl as well, where it's like when a character dies, they're stuck in this purgatory where they see kind of different versions of the characters and the people that they know and love, and see a different version of their world, and they have to go on this journey to escape this purgatory to then come back to life in the real world. And that's what I believe is happening here, is that due to the help of Tauret, Mark and Steven, and possibly Jake Lockley as well, are going to escape to the outside, come back to life, and are going to be able to finally take down Haro and, save the day. So really some interesting, intriguing stuff going on here. So much confusion, so many questions that I cannot wait to be answered. But that is the ending of Moon Knight episode 4. I cannot wait for episode 5. Like, this episode cannot come soon enough. I'm so invested in the show. I'm so excited to see where things go from here. But for now, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think about Moon Knight episode 4 on Disney Plus? What did you think of all the big twists and turns and the absolutely insane ending for this episode? But for now, guys, again, stay tuned for next week's episode review and breakdown for